Okay, July 25th, 2013. Would you say your name and your recruit training troop?
Yeah, my name's Roy Anderson. I was in the 32nd RTT.
All right, where do you live at present?
Present, I'm at East Long Meadow. I was born and raised in Chicopee.
All right, and did you go to the Chicopee High School and so forth?
Yes.
All right. How much education did you have?
Well, I've had 2 years at junior college.
Okay. And do you have a family?
Yes, I have 5 children.
All right, and how long you been married?
54, 55 years.
All right. Now, we were talking earlier, you were in the Second World War?
Yes.
And for how long?
A little over 3 years.
And that was in the U.S. Navy?
Navy.
And what was your duties there?
I was a gunner's mate.
Okay. And you went both theaters, the Pacific and also the European?
Right.
All right. And mainly transporting troops and supplies?
And supplies. Yeah, we started off, I made several trips across the North Atlantic, into England, then North Africa, and we ended up in the South Pacific.
Okay. And how old were you when you got out?
I'd say about 23.
All right. Now, what sparked your interest in the state police as a career?
Well, we were working at the time, and I wanted to better myself. I was working at the Moore Drop Forge. Pretty difficult job. Read about the state police examination and emphasized it was the first examination since before World War II. So I decided to take that. And it was held at the Classical High School in Springfield, and the year is 1971.
Okay. How old are you, by the way?
Now?
Yes.
I'll be 91 next month.
Okay. Now, when did you go into the academy?
I went in the fall of 1971.
And where was the academy? And why don't you describe what it looked like
Well,
back
the
then?
academy at that time was called the training school, incidentally. It wasn't called the academy at that time. It was located in back of the Framingham Barracks, where the general headquarters is today. There were 2 permanent buildings. One was a mess hall, and one was a smaller building with an office and living quarters for the staff. There was a long company street made up of 4-man tents, and the school that we had our classes in was also a larger tent. I think they were National Guard surplus tents, or anyway, borrowed from the National Guard. And then there was a small motorcycle building, was permanent. I remember it had a ramp, and it was raised about 2 feet above ground level. I remember that because we used to have to ride the motorcycles up the ramp. We had Indian motorcycles then, of course, they were all manual. And it was a very small building. So when you gun the engine to get up over the ramp, as soon as you hit the inside of the building, you had to stop quickly and go out the other side, through the wall, incidentally. So I remember that ramp very well, and I think probably it was a source of a lot of enjoyment from the staff watching us do that.
Now, why is that?
Pardon?
Were there accidents involving some of the
Well, yeah, we had a
trainees?
few. I can remember in particular, we used to ride a ring where I think it's a CD building is now, it's underground. There was a field there, and we used to ride a circle. And we had at that time was the first sergeant, John Collins. He was quite a character, full of many, many good stories. But anyway, he was an old cavalryman in the Army. And I suppose if you rode a bicycle, motorcycles weren't that difficult. But we had one man, I'm not going to tell you his name, I remember him very well. He had a tough time with the motorcycles. And as we made the first turn, he fell. And he got pinned under the motorcycle. So we all came to a quick stop, kind of scared. And I can still remember Sergeant Collins running across the field hollering, "Who told you to dismount, Hickey?" I remember that.
How long was the training?
I think it was 3 months at the time.
All right, and you were living there, obviously.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we had, like I said, there were 4 men to a tent. And actually, it wasn't that difficult because we're all veterans, and I think probably the military training sort of had us accepting the fact that it wasn't that exceptional.
All right. And when you had, did you have classroom and physical training?
Oh, yeah. In
Why don't
fact,
you go
there
into
was
that
a
a little
lieutenant
bit?
by the name of Flanders, and he was the academy commander. And he also was an instructor, a law instructor, and then we had other people come in from the outside, specialists in a particular field, and they'd lecture us. And then every Saturday morning, after our duties, we had examinations. And that was one of the requisites. You had to pass your exam every Saturday in order to come back the following week.
Now, when you were, it was Monday through Saturday?
We had to be back at the training school Sunday night at 10 o'clock. And we left on Saturday at noon, right after lunch.
So you had like a day off
Yeah.
and plus a few hours? Huh?
Yeah.
All right. For the guys that live far west, did everybody have their own car or?
Well,
how
I
did you
had
get back?
at the time I had a 41 Plymouth. And Dave McCarty and Norm Spafford were also going to the training school. They were ESPOs also. And I used to pick them up on a Sunday night, and we'd travel back to the school.
Now, was this modeled on Marine Corps training or Army training or what?
Yeah, well, it was all very military type. Actually, the whole organization was sort of organized on the military. Table of organization was military. The discipline was military. I think the ranks were a lot more relaxed. But other than that, it was very military.
And even when you later became a trooper, the discipline in the barracks and so forth, how would you describe that?
Well,
I
at
don't wanna
that
jump
time, of
ahead,
course, yeah, well, at that time, a corporal, they don't have them at that rate anymore, but a corporal was in charge of the barracks. And he was the word. And as I said, the barracks was very military also. There were 2 men to a room. We had our own bunk. In the smaller barracks like Lee and Munson, we had steel lockers. You had 1 chair. The blankets were blue blankets, and I can remember they had Troop B stenciled in the corner. And when you were out of your bunk, you had to make it a certain way. It was prescribed. We turned the sheet down into a collar, probably 2 or 3 feet from the headboard. And the pillow had to stand against the headboard, long ways. And the extra blanket was folded across the bottom of the bunk. And no gear was loose on the floor. Everything, when you were out of that room, everything had to be stowed in your locker. And as I said, that was the code in the barracks. We had a janitor, and we had a cook, civilian. The cook was a lady who lived in town, my first barracks, in Lee I'm talking about now. And she would come in Monday through Friday. So would the janitor. And on weekends, whoever was on the desk was expected to do the cooking. And every morning at the weekends, the night watch was expected to buff the floors and tidy up the guard room. So everything was very neat and clean. The teletype, we had to monitor the teletype, of course, from the desk. We had to cut it off at a certain length, and we put it up in book form so the patrols could read it and see what was going on. Stolen cars were listed on the teletype. We had a sheet that we called the hot sheet. We used to make up the stolen cars on the hot sheet and carry it out when we went on patrol with the computers, that was before the computers. So we used to put it in the cruiser and keep that with us. So everything was very military style. We had to keep checking in with the desk, and after midnight, we had to call in, or they would call us every 20 minutes, and we'd give them a location, tell them where we were.
What was your first cruiser? What year was it, and what type of car?
Well, I would think it was probably about a 1969, because I came out in 71. So I would think it would be about 1969. They were all pretty well worn by the time we got them.
Okay, when did you graduate from the academy?
Well, I was in probably in around November of 71. You see, at the time that I
Are
went
you
on.
sure it was 71?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, at 47. I got out at 71, excuse me. 47. I'm trying to think of, see, when I took the examination, after the written, the physical, and the oral, they selected 100 men. So of that 100 men, they took 50 and sent them to the training school. The rest of us, the other 50, they swore in as an emergency temporary state police officers, commonly known as ESPOs. I was an ESPO. So after they swore us in, they took us over to the supply depot, and they outfitted us with uniforms. Some of them had been already worn and turned back in about the troopers that had retired, but those that fit the best was what you got. They issued a firearm, a badge, and they told me my assignment was at the Grafton Barracks. That's where the Munson Barracks is now. Of course, my first question was, where's Grafton? And the fellow said, the trooper said, when you go down Route 9, you take 140, you can't miss it. So I didn't miss it. I reported to the Grafton Barracks. The corporal there was John Sidney at the time.
All right. We kind of skipped ahead a little bit. I'd like to get into go back to the academy for just a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You had obviously classroom training, motorcycle training. You had probably firearms
Yeah.
training and maybe hand-to-hand some
Yeah.
type of defensive.
Right.
What were the academic subjects in the school part?
What we did, we had first aid, mostly criminal law. And I think the emphasis was on the criminal law aspect of it. And as I said, Lieutenant Flanders handled that. And we had that examination every Saturday morning.
Now, if you failed the exam, what happened?
Well, the following week, probably about midweek, they told you that you hadn't passed, and they packed their bags and away they went.
They didn't give you a chance to take another test?
No,
Oh, really?
not that I remember. Of course, I didn't fail one, so I don't know. But anyway, there was 50 of us entered, and 41 graduated. So 9 didn't make it for some various reasons, I guess.
Okay.
Because we did have, at that time, they had what they called a demerit board. So any infraction that they called a demerit, you were marked on that. I can't remember how many demerits you were allowed, but after you reached the maximum, you were gone.
So you could fail an exam and you'd
Right.
be gone, and if you accumulated X number of demerits, you
You
were
were
gone.
gone, right.
Okay. Now, talk a little bit more about what an average day was in the academy.
Well, you got up early, very early.
Dark out?
Pardon?
Was it dark out when you
Just-
get up?
Yeah, so, and when we'd run the grinder, we'd run the course. And after we ran the course, we'd come back in and get cleaned up and make up your bunks. And as I said, it was four men to a tent. And we had a stove in the middle of the tent, so of course we had to keep that going too. But anyway, then we'd have breakfast, and even the latrine was a tent. That was another duty too. If you instead of getting a demerit, you did your duty in the latrine cleaning that. But anyway, then we get into the class mode. We go to different classes on different skills that we had to develop, motorcycle riding. We had to go to the range. We had a fellow there by the name of, the instructor by the name of Cyrus. I don't know if everybody remembers him, Wilford Cyrus. And he was very famous as an expert in the revolver. He was fantastic. As a matter of fact, he used to take us to the range and he'd demonstrate certain things like putting a lighted match out and things like that.
Did you ever run into Gunny Owens?
Oh, very well. Knew Gunny very well. He came down a year after I did. We worked together in the Pittsfield barracks. You know, Gunny was a legend in his own time.
He was.
I can still remember him very well.
He must have been similar to Cyrus and Robert Hunt later.
Yeah.
In the terms of their tremendous marksmanship.
Yeah, Robert Hunt was a lot like him.
Yeah.
I can still remember I still remember Gunny as he was a trooper up in Pittsfield, and his wife came in, and his son was very small, a very young kid then, and he had a cap on. And I happened to be in the guard room when he came in, and they both walked in, and the kid walked in, and he said, "Hi, Dad." And I remember Gunny said to him, "Hey, how are you? Square your hat." Yeah.
Okay. When you finally went into a barracks again, your first one was Grafton?
Yeah, I went to Grafton as an ESPO.
Okay.
Of course, like I said, I was very nervous at the time. Really, I had no idea what being a state trooper entailed. And here I was acting like one. So I was kind of nervous about that. And John Sidney was a nice man. He's kind of a stern man. And I didn't want to foul up. I wanted to do everything correctly, especially before I went to the school. I didn't want to get fired before I had a chance to get to the training school. And I worked with an experienced trooper. They called them patrolmen at that time. They weren't troopers then, they were patrolmen. And then they taught me how to do the duties of the night watch, handle the desk. And of course, on the night watch, I had to not only answer the phone, and you had to learn how to do the teletype, but you had to make up the daily strength, as that was called then. So we had to extract all the duties of the individual troopers and put it down in a form called the daily strength, so that it was a concise record of what they did that day. So you had to learn all that. It was all new to me. And like I said, I was a little bit nervous, and I didn't want to foul up.
A tour, when you were in this trooper capacity, a new trooper, what was a tour like? You'd show up at what time, and what would you do thereafter?
It was a long tour of duty at that time. As I remembered it, your tour lasted over 100 hours. And of course, on active duty, you had to live at the barracks. And of course, the pension was a little different too. I suppose you were away from home for such a long period of time. The pension at that time was 20 years, and you had to retire at 50, when you're age 50. So you had one night off and one day off in that span of the 100 better hours.
Now, when you had a night off, would you stay at the barracks?
Well, yeah, the married men would go home. The younger guys would stay in the area.
Okay.
It was only, as I remembered it, I think we would leave probably around 4 o'clock, and we had to be in by 10 o'clock the next morning. So it really wasn't a very long period of time. And talking about getting back to the barracks, at that time, a lot of the married troopers only had one car. And being away for so long, they had to leave it at home. And their wives would need that. And speaking of their wives, that was an extremely difficult period for the wives, because they had to run the household, they had to take care of all the emergencies that came up. And they certainly weren't going to call the barracks every time they had to make a decision. So you had to give them a lot of credit. Actually, they were a big help to these troopers. They couldn't make it otherwise. So, like I said, the married people would go home, and we usually stayed around, except on the day off. We'd go home on our day off.
And then you'd have what, just one day off, and then you'd have to go back in again?
Right.
For another 100 hours?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, when you had that night off in between.
So in the course of, let's say, a month, how many hours a week were you working?
I'd say about 100.
About 100 hours a
Yeah,
week?
when you figured the time. I mean, yeah, you had your patrol schedule, but when you weren't on patrol, you were expected to make your reports out. They did give you report time. You had to take care of your gear. You had to be pretty well, shined and neat and clean, because when you went out on patrol, you had to go before the corporal or whoever was on the desk. And at that time, the corporal was the only rated guy in the barracks. The next man in charge they called a senior man. He was the guy with the most seniority, so he took over when the corporal was there. Didn't get any more money for it, but he was in charge. So he was the guy that sort of gave you a quick inspection before you went out. And if you hadn't polished your gear and you didn't look neat, they told you about it.
And you probably had to polish it before you went out.
Yeah, well, that was some of the things you did off duty, in
Now-
between patrols and night watch. And of course, you had to take care of, when you came in, we were expected to go through the cruiser that you were going to use. I think we only had 4 cruisers. One was a plain cruiser, 3 were marked cruisers. So they were on the go most of the time. So probably a routine schedule. You'd come back in and you'd do a 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. We were kind of short-handed at the time, so the following day they would expect it to work 12 hours. You'd work 1 in the afternoon to 1 to 5. You'd come in for supper, and you'd go out at 6 to 10. Then at 10 o'clock you'd double up with the other patrol, and you work till 2 in the morning. And that was usually the schedule, unless they had a 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. or 6 p. to 2 a.m. And after you went to bed, if they had if you had an accident or something serious, you got up and went out. So some nights you'd call out in the middle of the night, but most nights it was pretty quiet.
All right, now, what was the jurisdiction of the Grafton Barracks when you first went there?
Well, I can't tell you too much about the area, because I used to ride with an experienced trooper, and my duties mostly were night watch. So I would only ride probably my first day back from time off for maybe 6 hours, and then I did night watch for the rest of the time. So
What
I
did that
don't know
amount
too much
to?
about that. My real patrol experience came at Lee, up at B1.
All right, what was a night watch? What
Well,
duties?
the night watch went on at 10 o'clock at night, you went on the desk, until 8 o'clock the following morning. And you took over the desk, and of course you did the routine desk duties, you logged all the calls and dispatched the cruisers for any emergencies. And at midnight, you changed the log to reflect the next day. And then you had to go down, check all the cruisers that were in, be sure it had enough oil in them. And then you checked the gas pump, because you had to take the gas book and you had to reconcile the numbers from the gas pump with what the log told you, so that that thing matched. And we also had coal-fired furnaces at the time, so you were expected to keep the fire going. And make the daily strength, as I told you, I had to find out how to do that. And we kept the daily strength. On the weekends, as I said earlier, we had to buff the floor, wax that, buff it, clean it, and be sure everything was ready for Monday when the corporal got back.
All right, when you were, when you would report, when you were riding with one of the senior trooper, what kind of incidents would you typically be dispatched to?
Well, we do anything that an ordinary trooper would do. We covered accidents, we booked speeders, we did motor vehicle stuff. I can still remember my second tour, coming back in from patrol with an older trooper, and as we were going by a storefront, he suddenly hit the brakes and made a U-turn and drove around the back of the store, and there was a fellow laying in the back seat of a car. So of course we got out, the flashlight shining on him, and of course I was all hepped up wondering what was going to happen. So he questioned this fellow a couple of times, and he asked him where he was from, and the guy said, Worcester. So he whipped open the back door, and he grabbed this guy, and he whipped him out, put him up against the cruiser, frisked him down, did some more questions, found out the guy had stolen the car. So going, after he had booked him, we had a cell block in the barracks, he put him in the cell block. I said, geez, that was great, I said, how did you ever come about that? He said, as soon as the guy told me he was from Worcester, we knew he never said Worcester, it was Worcester. So I knew he wasn't from around here, so I had to shake him down. Well, that was one of my first experiences that really stayed with me.
When you were on patrol, did you go to any homicides or robberies or plane crashes, anything that really stands out in your mind?
Well, we had some shootings, I don't remember them all. We had some very serious accidents. Anything that a normal trooper would do today, that we did, I think it was more concentrated today because things are a lot busier than they were then. But just the ordinary things that a trooper would do and train to do.
Okay, over the years, did you develop a special skill or were in a specialized unit?
I don't think particularly. Of course, at that time, we did most of these things ourselves. I mean, we handled and prosecuted our own cases in district court. If it got a little more serious and went to Superior Court, we got some help from the DA's office. At that time, there was probably only one detective lieutenant there. And then, of course, I did become involved with bookmaking at the time, which was something different. And I would think that would probably be my only extension beyond the normal trooper routine.
All right. Who was the troop commander when you were at Grafton? Do you recall?
I think I was a lieutenant at that time, was in charge of a troop. I think it was Bill Mack, Lieutenant Mack. I really didn't get to to CH very often. Actually, the only time that we'd go in there from the substation was once a month, one of the cruisers would be scheduled for maintenance. And that was another duty. When you come back from day off, before you went on patrol, they wouldn't waste a patrol taking a cruiser in for maintenance, so they'd send you, and you'd have to take a cruiser into PH and wait for it while the mechanics went through, maintain the cruisers, then you'd bring it back. Get a couple hours rest, and then you go on patrol.
Were you sleeping in the back of the cruiser when they were dropping the oil? Sounds like
No,
you
as a
could use
matter
little
of fact,
sleep.
when things were short-handed, I can still remember some of the troopers at BH complaining about it. If they were short-handed at BH, the desk sergeant would send them out and do a couple hours patrol out front, as they called it, on Route 10.
Well, you spent your entire career in uniform then.
Yeah, yes. Well, I had some good fortune there. I had a chance to serve as a personal aide to security detail for a governor. So that was the only time I ever worked plain clothes.
And how long, which governor did you work for?
Herder,
Who was it?
Governor Herder.
And what years was that?
I would think, in the late 50s,
And how many years did you do that?
about 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah.
And then you went back into uniform?
Yeah.
Now, were
Went
you
back to-
promoted at some point?
Yeah, I was a corporal in Pittsfield. And I was a sergeant in the detail for the governor. And then I was promoted to lieutenant and went to Northampton. And I think that was in the 60s. Then in the middle or late 60s, I was promoted to a captain in troop commander of B Troop. Then later I went troop commander in Framingham.
All right. At that time, when you were troop commander in B Troop, do you remember how many how many guys were under your command in B Troop? What was the size of the group?
Well, I would probably think 60, probably, 70 people,
And how many barracks?
5.
5 barracks.
5, you had
60
Lee,
people.
Shelburne, Munson, Russell, Pittsfield. And Russell was that temporary-looking building, we called it Fort Apache. It was a wooden building with a small front porch on it, had an office and living quarters. In fact, they still have the sign up in the new Russell Barracks, the Fort Apache sign.
Back then, when did the state police start to change, take on new jobs, increase its size?
Well, I think probably in the late 60s. I remember in the 70, as I said, I retired in 71. So at that time, after captain, they held an examination. This was the first years that they had the examination deal. They had an examination for staff captain, and I passed the examination for staff captain, and I was in General Headquarters, which was at 1010 Commonwealth Avenue at the time. So I began to work on the 40-hour transition. They were going 40 hours. So I would have to say that they began to change in the late 60s and early 70s.
Now, at that point, they were still living in the barracks.
Yeah, we were going into the 40-hour work week at that time, and there was a lot of talk about buying cruisers and getting out of the barracks, and it was a big transition. And of course, shortly after that, when they did make the change, they upped everybody's rank, and so they abolished staff captain, and we became majors.
Ah.
And then the designation changed, and I was a major, commander of Western Field Operations. So we had 5 majors and 1 lieutenant colonel. Lieutenant Colonel Bob Major, he was in charge, and John Moriarty was in charge of special services, and we had 2 bureau guys, Freddie Burke and John Keeley, and then 2 staff captains, if you will. Eddie Tonelli was commander of Eastern Field, and I had command of Western Field. And Western Field is B Troop, C Troop, and the Turnpike. And East had the airport, C and A.
What went into the decision to go not live in the barracks anymore? Talk about that.
Well, of course, as I said, the tours were long. It was getting a little bit difficult to recruit people. They didn't want to put up with that kind of a stay away from home, and the environment was better, the employment was much better, the situation all around was much better, and we were one of the only state police departments still in that barrack system. So it was time for a change. We had new commissioner, Bill Powers, who came up from the uniform branch, and he was very interested in making that change. So it was time.
When did you retire?
I retired in 1971. I can't remember. I think it was probably the summer of '71.
What did you do after you did? How old were you when you retired? You must have been 50.
No, I was 40. I was 49 at the time. You had to get out when you were 50. But I had been working in the gaming field, and at that time we used to seize telephones as gaming apparatus, and became friendly with people in the security division of the telephone company. The guy that ran the telephone company security was an FBI man, ex-FBI man, and he hired a captain from the state police who was involved with the bookmaking business and stuff, Dan Driscoll. And they were impressed with Dan. So as the openings would come in, they had a security man. The telephone company had a security manager in certain areas of the state and of New England, actually. So when an opening came in the Springfield office, Dan Driscoll asked me if I was interested, and of course I was. I was getting close to retirement. And I was kind of looking for a job. I'd had a couple of interviews. Nothing interested me, but this did. And so I said, sure, I'd be happy to. So when the office opened up, they decided they weren't going to hire right away. So I was in the process then of being promoted to a major, and so I thought, well, maybe I'll stick around and wait and see what this telephone company developed. So we were moving from general headquarters in 1010 Commonwealth Avenue. We moved our offices out to the Framingham barracks. That was room then because they were getting out of the barrack system. So I got the telephone call one day and said the opening was there. Was I interested? And I said yes, and I had to go in for a physical, and I had an interview with so-called cabinet. And they called back 2 or 3 days later and said I had the job in Springfield. And I would be in charge of the Western Division for the telephone company. And that covered all of Western Massachusetts and the state of Vermont. We didn't do building security, but we did handle several different types of investigations within the company, very similar to the job we were doing. like a small detective branch would be doing in the state police. So I gave my 2 weeks' notice, and I left. And when I got home, opened the back door to tell my wife I had taken the job, and she said, "Oh, good. I heard now that you're going with the telephone company, you retired." I said, "Yeah, I just did it a few hours ago. How did you know?" She said, well, I'm not going to tell you the fellow's name, but they already got a telephone call from Captain so-and-so. He was next on my list." So he got the word before my wife did.
Well, how long did you work for the telephone company?
17 years,
17.
yeah.
Wow.
I retired from them in 1988.
All right. What did you think about your career? Just an overall impression with the state police.
Well, I was very fortunate, and I was very fortunate with the telephone, and I really had a very enjoyable, significant career. I had a chance to work in 3 different troops. Like I said, I worked in a security detail as a personal aide to the governor, so I got a chance to see the State House and workings at the State House. I was a troop commander at B, troop commander at A, the major. So it gave me confidence, it gave me some contacts, gave me a lot of experience, and it gave me a history that I was able to take into corporate security later on. So I'm very proud of the department, and especially the progress it's made and the way it's perceived in the Commonwealth. It's just a fantastic organization, I think. And I'm very pleased and I'm proud to say that I'm a former trooper.
All right, we'll close with that. This is Bob Corey, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.